Good morning. Welcome to our forum today. Just a couple of housekeeping things. The forum will be live streamed on YouTube, so when we get to the question and answer portion, this microphone is going to be on that stand back there. And if you have a question, I know it's cumbersome, but if you wouldn't mind asking it from the mic, that way people online can continue to be a part of the conversation. Thank you. Let's start with prayer. The Lord be with you. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you for the beginning of spring, for the bright, beautiful morning in Northwest DC, for all those gathered here together. We pray for our friends and family in Afghanistan and in Ukraine. Pray for all those who are hurting today, did not wake up to a beautiful spring morning. God, bring peace to this world. Thank you for our speaker this morning. May our ears and eyes be opened. May you draw us closer into your love. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Well, our speaker today is the Reverend Joy Caroll Wallis. Joy was one of the first women to be ordained in the Church of England, as well as the youngest clergy member elected to the General Synod. Her ministry in the inner city embraced the needs of the poor, homeless, mentally ill, families, youth, and the elderly. Her experience in the priesthood was the inspiration behind the hit BBC sitcom, The Vicar of Dibley. Just going to add my own anecdotal story here. When the very first year I was ordained, we had this introductory class of priests, and what we did for our training was to watch this show. And it was so great because every person in the show, I was like, I know that person, I know this person. Joy has spent the last 20 years immersed in Washington, D.C. schools and youth sports as commissioner of Little League Baseball, fundraiser, event planner, PTA President, President of Wilson High School Baseball Boosters, organizer of Wilson Baseball Trip to the Dominican Republic. Her network runs wide and deep in this community. She is also a founding board member and currently board chair of the Wild Goose Festival. Please join me in welcoming Joy Caroll Wallis.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. It's really good to be with you this morning. And thank you for coming. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in and watching the live stream of this. I have to wear my glasses because I'm old now. But 28 years ago it was now that in 1994 I was one of the first women to be ordained in the Church of England. It seems relatively recent, I think, 1994, because in America, of course, women were ordained much earlier in the 1970s. 1976 were the first ordinations. So 1994 is when England, the Church of England, caught up and got with the program. So I was part of the campaign for the ordination of women, and as Joshua mentioned, I was elected to the General Synod and was able to actually cast my vote on that historic day in 1992, 2 years prior to when we were actually ordained. And I would like to just take you back to that moment and just read, if you please excuse me for reading from the prologue of the book I ended up writing about all that, which is also very old. I wrote it when my son, Luke, who's now 24, was 2. So it's an old book, but it's got history in it. So I just would like to take you back with me to that day in 1992. So I'm in the chamber of Church House in Westminster. And George Carey, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was about to put an end to the agonizing wait. I had not moved all day from my seat. My body cried out for food, coffee, and painkillers for my pounding headache. But I wanted to hear every word spoken for and against the motion to ordain women to the priesthood in the Church of England. At the end of the debate, we voted. I rose to my feet and moved towards a large oak door engraved with the words "Clergy Eyes." On the other side of the door stood tellers, carefully counting each body that passed through. My hands were sweating and my heart was beating wildly. This was the precious vote that I had been elected to cast. Just as I reached the door, I had a fleeting moment of panic and checked that I was going through the right door. This was not the time to make that kind of mistake. The three houses, bishops, clergy, and laity, each had to secure a 2/3 majority for the motion to pass, and we knew it would be close. On the other side of the doors, in the circular corridor surrounding the chamber, those who had voted spoke in hushed tones to one another. I stood beside one of my women colleagues, a good friend from the Manchester diocese. She whispered to me with a look of agony on her face, "It feels like we've been pregnant all this time, preparing for new birth, and now at the last minute, we're not sure whether the baby will be born alive or dead." As I moved around the corridor, I passed those who had come through the clergy nose door. It was then that I saw Father Andrew Burnham, my great friend on Synod, who was against the ordination of women. We had vowed to respect each other's opinion and to remain friends throughout. We looked at each other in this clear moment of difference. Having come through different doors, we hugged. Though we didn't yet know the outcome of our votes, we were both aware of the pain that one of us would soon feel. After what felt like hours, we were all summoned back into the chamber. Into the silence, the Archbishop now read the numbers that had been handed to him. We madly tried to do the math. Had it passed or not? We weren't sure. The numbers were so close in the House of Laity. And my stomach clutched as the Archbishop spoke the words, "The motion is passed." We had just, in fact, achieved the 2/3 majority in the House of Laity by one vote. If one person had voted the other way, the whole process would have had to be set aside for another 5 to 10 years, because the same synod is not allowed to address the same motion twice. So one of my colleagues said, "We've been common law priests all these years, and now the church has made honest women of us." After that decision of the Church of England to ordain women, there was a lot of fallout, and a lot of people were very upset, particularly those who were opposed to the ordination of women. So the Synod came up with another motion to be debated called the Act of Synod, and this was to provide compensation, if you like, financial packages to clergy who wanted to leave and start a new career, opportunities for them to not have women come to their church on their staff, and they could sign an agreement to say that that was allowed. And the most controversial thing was they were allowed to have their own bishops. They were allowed to have bishops who did not have their own diocese to take care of, but they were one for the northern province and one for the southern, and they would fly around the country taking care of people who were opposed to the ordination of women, who didn't want a bishop to ordain their members, or do their ordinations, or confirm their members, because they had somehow been sullied or tainted by ordaining a woman. And it was really quite ludicrous. And, because this idea that the apostolic succession from the early church, the laying on of hands, which is ordination passed from one generation to the next, and the people who were opposed to the ordination felt that pure line of male ordination from the early church had been broken, and tradition had been spoiled in the Church of England, which is why a lot of people left. And a lot of people left and joined the Roman Catholic Church, and which was strange because I had a whole bunch of friends in the Roman Catholic Church who also believed that women should be ordained in the Roman Catholic Church, and that's a whole other fight that's going on over there. So it was a bit of an unholy alliance when you think about it. So all that happened, and just to say, while I was making a speech against that motion in the General Synod, there was a visitor in the gallery watching the proceedings, and this visitor was a man who is a writer And he wrote 4 Weddings and a Funeral, Love Actually, Notting Hill, all the big comedy hits in England. And he had written 1 episode of The Vicar of Dibley, a TV series that he had in his mind that he wanted to write about a woman priest who shows up in a country village where they're all expecting a man called Jerry, and Geraldine shows up with her guitar. And he was looking for somebody who would help him because he'd written 1 episode and he realized that he didn't know anything else about women priests and that he needed some help. So he heard me making my speech, and he had already chosen Dawn French to be the actress. And Dawn French is a very huge well-known comedy actress in England, and she's the same sort of age as me, and we were very alike in many ways. And so he zoomed in on me and asked me if I would be his consultant and his advisor, and to him as he developed the writing of this show, which ended up being a massive success and ended up having a cult following, and a lot of people over here have seen it and love it as well, especially in church circles. So if you haven't seen it, I don't want to go on too much about it and bore you to death, but take a watch, and it's fun. I think you'll enjoy it. You'll either love it or you'll hate it, because it's a little risque in places, and yes. So I had a lot of fun with that. It was a diversion from the everyday work of ministry. I was working very focused on the inner city, urban poor of South London, and suddenly along came this opportunity to engage with the whole cast of actors. I became rather like the chaplain to the cast. I would go to the filming sometimes, and one day there's 1 episode which is the blessing of the animals, and where the whole village where the show is filmed in Oxfordshire was invited to bring their animals to be guest actors in the show. So they were all the animals from the village. And as she greets people, I was standing behind her, and the vicar is greeting the people coming into church. And one guy comes in, and he's a punk rocker, and he's got a leather jacket and pierced nose and tattoos and spiky hair. And the dog has this big, dog-studded collar, and it's a pit bull, and it looks really mean. And they walk in, and she says, "Hello. Welcome. What's your name?" she says to the dog. And the owner says, "Satan." And she just says, "Oh, very good of you to come at all, really." And in they go. So there's lots of really good moments in the show. It was fun to be a part of. And I had a whole 10 years of ministry, and then my life, this is really what I want to address today, my life took a different turn, because I'm not working in a church today. I'm not employed by any church institution or organization, but I still feel like I am living out my vocation and my calling in the other places that I find myself in life. 25 years ago, after all this happened, I met and married my husband, Jim Wallis, and who lives and works here. And I threw in my lot with him. We had 2 sons. For a number of years, I led the worship at Sojourners magazine, which is a non-profit that he founded 50 years ago to address issues of race and justice and poverty. Both of my boys, it turned out, loved baseball and were quite good at it. So this English priest became a baseball mum. And I became the commissioner of the Northwest Little League, which maybe some of your kids have gone through. Oh, if they have, I probably know you, probably know them. And my husband coached my kids until they were 12. And now, of course, you've got a new coach in Northwest Little League, Reverend Joshua. So I'll be going to keep an eye on you, make sure you obey all the rules and don't... Yes. And I also have thrown myself... I did all the school stuff that lots of you mums have done. But my church, in a way, my tribe, is the Wild Goose Festival. I was a founding board member of the Wild Goose Festival, and we just had our 10th festival. This is a gathering of people from all over the country once a year in North Carolina. We meet from Thursday to Sunday, and people bring their tents, their RVs, and it's a music, justice, and arts festival. And it really is close to my heart. And we had our 10th festival in September. We postponed it because we didn't have a festival last year during COVID. So this has been a big part of my life. I'm just going to give you a 90-second clip. It's really short, to show you what the Wild Goose Festival is all about, because it would be so great if there was a contingent of folks from St. Columba's who might like to come and be a part of this all-age, very diverse, family-oriented festival, if we can make it work.
Where it seems like something might happen. I find it to be a very imaginative exploration with other people about what could be.
The Wild Goose is actually a place that is trying to break down barriers which have divided people along lines of denomination, ideology, political party, class, race, gender, sexual orientation.
One of the reasons I love Wild Goose Festival is we come here as human beings on a journey. A lot of us alienated from our religious paths, on a journey somewhere else. Wild Goose Festival is the one place I go every year where I know I am not alone.
Wild Goose is a progressive, faith-based justice music and arts festival. Therefore, there's nothing remotely like it in the United States. I mean, this is it.
Obviously, that's an old video. It's 2017, but it was the shortest one. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what that's all about, because it's a difficult thing to put into words. So I often wrestle with this situation of being an ordained woman who's no longer fulfilling her calling in the church. I often feel guilty when people ask me, why don't you go back into the church? Why aren't you working in the church? And I've been back and forth on that question. I've applied for jobs. And I don't feel guilty anymore. I feel like I've been led to the right place in my life. I'm not preaching from a pulpit, but I'm in a grounded, secure place, knowing that I don't need to wear the clerical collar to be the person that God wants me to be and to do what is mine to do. My bishop in Southwark Diocese once said to me, and I found this very helpful, he said, "Joy, in the Church of England, we don't pay you a salary in return for duties. We pay you a stipend to enable you not to work, to enable you to be present to those who need you, to enable you to read and pray and be there and have spaces in your calendar for when people need you. And that was quite a revolutionary thought to me, who was a workaholic and felt guilty every time I had an afternoon off. And I feel in many ways that God has given me this gift of being able not to work. And I consider that to be, in many ways, an ordination, a vocational calling to throw myself into other things and to discover what is mine to do. St. Francis was the person who coined that phrase. St. Francis once said, "I have done what was mine to do. May Christ teach you what is yours." So what is mine to do? It's a question for all of us. Clearly, as members of the body of Christ, we don't all wear a clerical collar. We're not all ordained, but we're all ministers. We all have a vocation, a calling, and sometimes it's really hard to know what that is. But here's a rule of thumb that I think helps. Your vocation or your calling is where your gifts and your talents meet the crushing needs of the world. Your vocation is where your gifts meet the needs of the world. So, for example, Richard Curtis, who I had this conversation with many times, who's a writer, a creative artist, he is very aware of the crushing needs of the world, and he created comic relief and brought that to America with America Gives Back. He made a lot of the Vicar of Dibley episodes around hunger and justice and global poverty. He wrote a short film, not a documentary, a short film called The Girl in the Cafe around climate change. And, you know, if you look up some of the stuff he's done, he's an example of where his gifts and his talents, he hasn't just used that to, you know, be a big filmmaker star, which he is. He's used his gifts to meet the needs of the world. And it's the same whether you are going to be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer. I think our faith leads us to ask, what kind of teacher am I going to be? How am I, as a teacher, how will I meet the needs of the world? What kind of doctor will I be? Who are the most vulnerable people in our world that need care? What kind of lawyer will I be? A lawyer for those who have no voice or no money. When your gifts meet the crushing needs of the world, your job becomes your holy vocation. Our friend Christine Delaney is from her family is from the Ukraine, and she is hosting a young Ukrainian student right now in our own neighborhood here, and she is quite overwhelmed because this young student is in constant communication with her family back home, a teenager, and Christine is taking care of her. And it's very difficult and hard work. For me, in the end, it wasn't to be in the church. I looked at my gifts and I'm like, okay, you're a leader, you're a bossy woman, you're an organizer, you're a community activist, you're a communicator, a pastor, a gatherer of people. So I have found other things to exercise those gifts. So for the past 8 years, one of the things I've helped to do is lead a trip for the Wilson High School baseball team to the Dominican Republic. It's a service trip and a baseball trip. And we take about 30 players each year to go. We take 20 bags of donations, about $30,000 in cash, that's paid for 2 remarkable young women to go to medical school in Santo Domingo, and we support the ministry of the Grey Sisters with their health clinics, retirement communities and schools. And the players, these wonderful young men from Wilson High School, mix cement, build walls, paint buildings, and visit with disabled children in an amazing orphanage. This trip changes people's lives, and significantly it changes the lives of the high schoolers and their coaches who have their worldview challenged and changed because of their proximity and the friendships that they make with those players and the people in the Dominican Republic. Finally, just to finish the circle of what I do, I am a substitute teacher now. That was my first career before I was called into ministry in the church. I was an elementary school teacher. And so now I'm back in the classroom, substitute teacher here at Journey, at John Eaton Elementary School, where my kids went to school, and other DCPS schools. And some people, and in my darker moments, might think that I've moved backwards to the career I had first. But I honestly feel I have come full circle. I've moved with hopefully faithfulness through the different phases of my life and my calling and vocation, and have come full circle. And I'm back in the classroom and supporting my husband and the work that he does. And I feel very grounded and available for where I'm needed in the community. So my question is really for all of us to say, what is mine to do? It's a good question, wherever life leads us. And as I've discovered, we don't need to be ordained to ask that question. Heck, we don't even need to be a Christian to be faithful to living humanely and doing what is mine to do. So I'm going to end it there and offer some time for questions. I do want to say, though, that I don't usually do this because, as I said, it's so old, but I've got a few books here which really chronicle the story of the journey towards the ordination of women to the priesthood and my involvement in the show, The Vicar of Dibley, and some of the funny stories and things are in here. It's a light read, but I think it's fun. But I would, because I wrote it. But I thought that what I would like to do is I will make these, there's only a few, but I'll make them available for a donation. And if you'd like to make a donation to, I thought it might be nice to support the supporter, and we'll give a little gift to Christine Delaney to help take out her teenager for dinner, or buy her something special, or do something to alleviate maybe something more significant they can help directly with their family in Ukraine. But if you'd like to take a book and make a donation, I'll pass it on to Christine Delaney.
Thank you, Joy. I thought it would... We'd love to hear about your experience, both of like church services and also like your spirituality coming before ordination, during and after. And I know that you've been involved in lots of different churches in the DC area, and how being ordained changed, and then not being in a full-time work for the church, but being a part of a church, what that experience changed for you.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. When I came from the Church of England to the United States of America, I was licensed by the Bishop of Washington. So the Church of England, as you know, is the Anglican Communion branch in England, and the province here is the Episcopal Church. So I could transfer my credentials, as it were, from the Church of England to the Episcopal Church. So I was licensed. We had children almost immediately after we were married, and made the decision that I would be home-based with our kids, partly because I was an older mum. I was 38 when I had my first son and 43 when I had my second. And it was something I'd longed for all my life and was very excited about being a mother. So part of me didn't want to juggle too much. I really wanted to focus on them. And my husband had the kind of calling that led him away from the home a lot. He traveled a lot, was speaking a lot, and was often not available. And I wanted to be available for my kids, both physically and emotionally. So I spent those early years not being employed by the church. And so we went to churches, and it's complicated. It's complicated when you marry someone, isn't it? Because they often don't have the same needs or desires as you when it comes to church. And I wanted my kids to want to go to church too. And so we were very nomadic in our church life, and we went from church to church. We supported a pastor friend of ours who took the job at First Baptist Church on 16th Street for a number of years. And I was a deacon in the Baptist church, which is quite bizarre, really. But again, I was trying to live out my calling in whatever place I was led. And then one of the young folks at Sojourners had planted a church in Columbia Heights, the district church. So we started going there to support that church and that operation. And it was a church full of young people. Jim and I were the oldest people in the congregation. But our kids liked going there, so we went. It was not my cup of tea, I have to say, and I really missed the liturgy of the Episcopal Church. And so now that my kids are, I don't know whether I'm really answering your question here, but when my kids, my youngest son's just now a freshman in college, and now I get to choose where I go to church because I don't have to consider anybody else. So that's why I'm coming back to St. Columba's, because I feel like I want to be rooted in a place that is my tradition and where I have my roots. I feel like I went through a long period of bereavement when I left my church in England. I was very happy to get married and move to the United States. Within 1 year, I left my family, I left my country, I left my church, I got married and became a mother within 1 year. So I kind of had to reinvent myself, and the person that I was in this book is completely different to the person that I am now. And it was all good. You know, I was in love, I had children, I was on a new adventure, it was fabulous. But the one thing that I think I would say is that I felt a huge bereavement for the Church of England, which was where my primary calling was, and my vocational calling. And when I go back, whenever I go back and visit my old churches, I feel that same love that somehow never found roots here in the United States in terms of church. So I don't know whether callings and vocations can be place-specific, but maybe mine was. But God walks with us through all those phases and changes of life. Yeah. In England, yes. The question was how many women are ordained now in the Church of England. I'm not sure of the exact answer to that. I do know that when I was ordained, there were 500 of us. There were 2 of us. There were like 5 of us women at seminary. And now it's like, I think the percentage is more of a 50-50. So it's hugely different. And women are taking on more of a role in the church and in church leadership. We're still, it's still a struggle to make sure that women are in places of significant responsibility and are not just assistants. And, you know, we need women in decision-making places in the diocesan structures. We need women as archdeacons and bishops and not just associates.
Joy, what a treat to hear you, and thank you for coming today. I have a very short anecdote and a question. I ended up getting christened at St. Albans, went on to university, and then graduate school in the UK. And I thought at that point in my 20s, I should get confirmed. And I had the opportunity to meet regularly with a young priest and talk about the confirmation process. And I remember being a feminist and crossing my arms and saying to him in 1982, "When are you going to ordain women?" Well, it obviously took a while.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, you really sound like you were on the forefront of many of those conversations. And can you offer to us one or two of those somewhat specific conversations you recall where you could see that light bulb go on, or you could see you were changing a mind? Because it obviously took a fair amount to get there.
It did, and I worked with a colleague. When I came out of seminary, I was ordained as a deacon, and I was a deacon for 6 years because women weren't allowed to be priests, but they were allowed to be deacons. That was the tipping point for us. The Synod allowed women to be deacons in 87. And so when I was ordained in 88, I was the first year following that women were allowed to be deacons. And that meant that we wore the clerical collar, that we were called reverend, and we could do, we did weddings, funerals, baptisms. And so the public and the people sitting in the pews didn't know the difference between a deacon and a priest. And so the question became, oh, well, hang on then, if you're not a priest, what are you? What's the difference between a deacon and a priest? And really the difference was only 3 small things: that you couldn't celebrate the Eucharistic prayer, the blessing over the bread and the wine, you couldn't give the blessing to the congregation, and you couldn't declare the forgiveness of sins. All 3 things were the small liturgical things that happened on a Sunday morning. And when people heard the answer, it was like people were blown away by the injustice of it. It just became really transparent that women should be priests. And that was the tipping point. I had very supportive male colleagues. My colleague Duncan, I was senior over my junior colleague who came to join the staff. And when he was ordained as a priest, he asked me as a deacon to do the gospel reading. I went to his ordination service, and there was a protest on the outside of the church of women holding banners saying, "Where are the women?" And I walked past them and gave them a high five and went into the church to read the gospel at my friend's ordination. And so to me, that was a picture of how I worked on the inside while other women worked on the outside, and it took a multi-pronged approach to get that public opinion changed. And some of it was protest, but a lot of it was relationship and working behind the scenes and listening to one another. I did a whole series of educational talks around the diocese about the ordination of women that the whole of the Church of England did from the bottom up before the vote was taken. It was like to educate people on the issues before the votes were taken. And it was like a road show, and I did the arguments in favor of the ordination, and a friend of mine did the arguments against. And by the end of that year of 32 meetings, we became really good friends, and we understood each other's positions. And I actually believe he changed his mind at the end, but he didn't actually have to cast his vote because he moved to a different diocese, lost his seat on synod.
So my question's going to take you back to Dibley. I'd like to know if Satan and his master were actors or if they were accidental walk-ons. And secondly, did you sneak in an actual blessing for the animals if you were behind the actress?
Sorry, I missed the second half part. Did I see?
Did the animals actually get their blessing? Did you sneak one in?
The Satan and the person was a real actor. So yeah, anybody who had speaking parts were actors, not a real parishioner. And no, I don't believe they did do a real service. There's another funny anecdote from that episode where I was looking at the script for that beforehand, and there's one part before they all come in, she says the prayer at the beginning, and she says, oh, and in the script it was, oh Lord, who rode into Bethlehem on the back of a donkey, bless these animals, and I'm reading this and I was saying, oh no, that's wrong. They're going to have to change that. It's Jerusalem. So I was able to flag that to the writers, but there was often a few little things like that because, you know, they would get a barrage of mail. Say, that's not how it works, or that's wrong, or you made that mistake. So, yes, quick one. Actually, this one that we've just taken, we just came back. We always go over the President's Day weekend, and this was, I believe, our 7th trip. Coach Mack and Home Run Baseball Camp, he has ties in the same community.
Could you just repeat the question?
And I'm sorry. The question was, how many years have we been going to the Dominican Republic, and are we connected with Coach Mack and Home Run Baseball Camp? And the answer is yes and no. Coach Mack introduced us to that community. He had ties in the Dominican Republic with the Grey Sisters in the same town, Consuelo, and introduced us to that community. And the first year that we went and Coach Mack introduced us to all of his friends, and we developed our own relationships with them. And so we're now independent in a sense of Coach Mack, but he's always a friend of our program. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we were well suited in some ways. I don't think anyone else could be married to Jim Wallis except me, and I don't think anybody else could be married to me except Jim Wallis. So it's kind of works both ways. But no, yeah, we both have very similar passion for justice, and he's much more tireless than I am, I have to say. You know, I don't know where he gets his energy from, but he's a champion, yeah.
I think this has to be the last one,
yes.
But just two quick things. We came in late, so I'm very sorry to have missed the first part, but I loved what you said about your definition of vocation as where our gifts meet the world's needs, and it reminded me of the wonderful Frederick Buechner's often quoted definition of vocation, which is quite similar. He says it's that place where your own greatest gladness meets the world's greatest hunger. And I think they're very similar. And then any of you who have already been to church this morning or about to be, what you said about vocation is so enriched by the gospel story of the burning bush and the calling, not the gospel, the calling of Moses, because it reminds us all when Moses said, well, I can't do that. I'm not worthy. That vocation doesn't mean, okay, you've been chosen because you have all the gifts and you're perfect and you're going to be able to do that. It's despite all our misgivings, we have that sense that we can use our gifts and despite our shortcomings. And so thank you for enriching our understanding of vocation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.